keep wanting to say good morning because that's usually when I'm in here. So I would probably say good morning at some point, but good evening. Good morning somewhere. That's right. Thank you all for being out here again. I was telling someone it's been really good for me to have to marinate in some of this, and I've had lots of opportunity to use it. But thanks for just being willing to share with each other and learn more about loving our kids. So I'm going to put Jonathan on the spot again to pray, and then we'll get going.
Right. All right, let's pray. Lord, we do just thank you that you are present with us. We thank you for your love over us and that you delight in us as your children. We thank you, Lord, that we can come to you with our lives, with our crayon drawings, and we lift them up to you, even in worship, and you delight in that. You delight in what relationship with us. We ask that you just bless this time this evening, Lord. Bless us, our words as we speak and ears as we hear, and edify one another in the conversations at the tables. We just ask for your presence with us and your blessing. In Jesus' name, amen.
So a quick recap from last week. We were kind of drawing on the metaphor of this rocky seacoast, that all the kind of the years leading up to this are a journey inland with our kids. And we get to this rocky shore, and on this rocky shore, we're trying to help our kids build a boat to go sail off. And this is a really scary, exciting, fun, and sometimes painful season as we're stretched between the nostalgia and the regret and the sweetness of the past and all of the hopes and the fears for the future. And we talked about what does it look like to cultivate safety in this very place of rocky terrain and in between. And we're using the strains of dignity, calm presence, curiosity, and compassion. And what does it look like first actually to receive those ourselves? What does it look like to experience the affirmation of dignity from Jesus? Like if we were one of the children that were taken to Jesus that he laid his hand on and blessed, do we need to know that ourselves, that our own past selves and our own childhood was blessed by Jesus? Because the more we can experience the affirmation of our dignity from him and his blessing, the more we have to give to our children. And the same goes for presence and curiosity and compassion. As we experience more of that in Jesus ourselves, we have so much more to extend to our children. And then talking about walking with them in these places and the invitation to relationship that are these things: dignity, presence, curiosity, compassion. But we're also trying to do this figuring out what to give to them, what to do ourselves, when do we give them the hammer and the board, when do we take it ourselves. Jonathan has a story from camping trips with the boys that he was going to share about river crossings.
So, if you missed last week, hopefully the video will be out. Go back and watch that. Lauren was going through all of these things so amazingly. And I really came into last week having like 3 little bullet points. And as she spoke, I was sitting here going, oh, yeah, that one. So, my first advice would be marry a young lady like this. But if you're already approaching the teen years, all right, so I see this whole process. I love Lauren's analogy of being inland and you're heading towards this rocky shore. You're heading towards the shoreline, and you, as a parent, you've already launched as a boat. You're out there, and you're helping them build one, and it can be terrifying because you're looking at the resources maybe that they've collected along the way and going, you are not going to survive getting past the waves, and it can be terrifying. And as she was saying that, it just reminded me of the younger years and how this is slightly different. That just reminded me of, I love to take my boys camping. I love going camping, and the girls as well now. And when I got married and they were younger, you just camp with the kids too. So they were on my back and holding hands. And there was this one time when I went with a bunch of friends, and Titus was probably 6 and Britt was 4. And we're going on this new trail we hadn't been on before up in North Georgia. And there were about 6 or 7 creek crossings. And these North Georgia creeks were, probably 10 to 12 feet wide or so, and deep enough to get you good and wet if you fell in, and a little too big to jump over. So as we're going up with the boys, we'd get to these creek crossings, and I would run across and drop my backpack, and then I'd come back and pick up Titus and carry him across, because the worst thing in the world is to get to your camping spot with a soaking wet 4-year-old who's miserable. And so I'd come back across, and I'd pick up Britt, and I'd take him across with his little backpack and his teddy bear, and we'd be on our way. So at each creek crossing, I was doing this 5 times: go across, come back, go across, come back, get the kids. Sometimes some of the other guys there would help pick one up and hand them across to me. And so it's this picture of when you're parenting the little guys, you're doing so much of it for them, and you're trying to get them to do little pieces along the way. And then as they're, that analogy of coming to the shoreline, it's kind of like hitting a river inland. It's a little bit of a challenge, but you're not sending them off. You're helping them through. And you're, doing life with them holding your hand. And then as they were older, just about a year and a half ago, took my guys as teenagers, 17 and 15, up to North Georgia, and their cousins all came. This time we knew we were going to cross a real river. It's probably about 50 feet across and, waist deep or so. And so we brought a rope, and I taught them how to build a rope bridge, and they clipped their stuff onto it, and we did this going across the river. But it was more like instructing them and letting them build it themselves. And, they were going to get as wet as they built that bridge. How well you build it is how wet you get. And so, they'd start going across, and the first guy's dipping down. No, we need to make it tighter, and then they tighten it up again for the next guy, and he does a little better, et cetera. But just that picture of it's going to be different, because in this season, you're having to let go of some of that hand-holding and just let them do it. And that's part of the dignity, showing them that dignity as a teenager to grow into making their own decisions, and stepping back a little bit and letting them do it. And that can be terrifying. For second point, almost related, a little less related to this, is for these guys, they have the toddler years, and then they hit the teen years. For me, the early teen years, it was very helpful to see as a dad, because I finally connected this, that to me, they're just toddlers again in teenage bodies. Going through that early teen years, because they're learning about all these emotions that when they were 2 and 3, they're like, hey, emotions, and they're absolutely crazy. And you can kind of be like, as a parent, like, I know they're crazy, they don't even know what emotions are. And you can be patient with them through that. When they hit the teen years, you think they should know better. But kind of like, what's that movie, Inside Out, with the little guys in the head, the emotions and everything. They got this whole new control set when they hit teenage years, and they don't know what to do with it. And again, they're like toddlers learning this whole new realm of emotional experiences, and everything in the world is the biggest thing in the world to them at that moment. And just, not seeing them as toddlers. But it was helpful for me to see, respect their experience, and kind of hold that with a little bit more dignity of like, oh, they're not just being rebellious or, crazy little kids. They're actually experiencing something new that they don't know what to do with. And how can you help them hold that time with dignity? So.
And tonight we're going to kind of go more into 2 other areas where we want to sort of apply these ideas, and that is marriage and community, and a little bit of, we're going to tag on culture at the end too. And I just want to say that talking about parenting and marriage can be a really, really painful subject. I think about my single parent friends and what they face and the loneliness they probably feel, and that I probably have not been sensitive to. And so I just want to put that out there, as we're talking about this, I hope we're thinking about more than just our experience, but we're acknowledging that there is a wide range of marriage experience when it comes to parenting, and there's a seat at the table for everyone. And I hope that we are compassionate to those who are struggling in whatever ways and are feeling functionally as single parents or are quite literally single parents. I think that's an area where we really can grow as communities to come alongside and support. So last Thursday night, the day after our first session, before we were leaving to community group, I could tell I had some really stressed out kids over various and sundry things. And I'm trying to get out the door, and I'm on the phone with Titus and Carson, because they're trying to talk through something at school, and I kind of just sort of hurriedly give some instructions and leave. And later regretted leaving, because a couple hours in a community group, I get a phone call. And one of my children is very distressed about something, and that child then passes off the phone to someone else who is deeply distressed about something. And then the phone gets passed off again to someone who has a music audition that's supposed to be uploaded that night. So I walk into the Chalk's living room and I'm like, guys, I gotta go. And the whole way home, I'm feeling kind of annoyed and a little frustrated, partly because one of the child's struggles look a lot like mine, and that really kind of grates on me when it's an ongoing thing that we keep talking about, and it keeps mirroring my own stuff. So I'm trying to preach to myself everything I had just spoken the night before. And I go home, and I sit on the bed with one of the child, and I'm talking through it and praying and trying to be present and compassionate and all the things, and you go to all the different children. And finally, it's like 11:30 at night. I walk in the room, and there's still the video to take care of. And there's still Mozart to be scanned into a PDF and uploaded. I don't know if you've tried to upload Mozart sonatas, but they don't fit on any scanner. So guess who got all of my leftovers? Who got none of the compassion and calm that my kids had just gotten? My husband got none of that calm. And there might have been some words spoken into my scanner app that shouldn't be recorded. And the next morning, after we finally got that silly video figured out, I realized, man, I was able to give my kids that safety and that dignity. I didn't give it to my husband. How often am I not actually creating that space for us and not cultivating that kind of safety and acceptance and presence here? So there was some repenting that had to happen in preparation of this talk. So one of the things that I would love to kind of talk is like, how do we give dignity in this season, especially when it's so full and so busy, and we're both going in so many different directions, and we're driving kids here and there and everywhere. And I think one thing to really keep in mind is and this sounds really kind of self-explanatory, but is to kind of accept, where are we? One thing that has been said a lot in the history of RCC is God can only meet you where you are. And I think there's something that can often trip us up, of this idea of what we should look like together, or what his strength should look like, or what my strength should look like, or what our parenting team should look like, and who should be doing what. But I think being really honest about, where are we, and how can I bless where we are, where Jonathan is, where I am, where we are together. What are the different strengths that he brings, that I bring? What are the different weaknesses? How can we actually call out the good in each other and name that good and really bolster that good, even if it doesn't look like maybe what we think is the ideal of what that should be. If one spouse is really strong in something, call that out, name it and encourage the heck out of it. I would say this is not something that comes easily to me. I did not grow up in a house with much verbal affirmation. And it is like something I'm always trying to grow in. But, no one else is doing that in your life in terms of, no one else is seeing the day-to-day of what you are doing for your children and with them more than your spouse. And so what an opportunity to call out the good. And I think also when we have to call out the negative, I think there's a way to do that that is more of an invitation rather than a condemnation. In more of a way of saying, hey, I think there's an opportunity for you right here to actually have immense power for good in this child's life. Like, look, what could that look like if you stepped into that? I see this gift in you, and I see the way that connects with that kid. Is that a way to just invite your spouse into that instead of condemning them for what they're not doing? It's a challenging and discouraging enough role as it is. When your kids are little and you've had a rough day, they go to sleep and you get to go in at night and kiss them on the forehead and they're really cute and they give you cuddles. There's not that dopamine rush when they're 6 feet tall and and you've had a tough day. So you don't get that kind of immediate neurofeedback like you do when they're little. And so I think it's an opportunity to really speak into that for each other and to come along and say, man, I see this good you're doing in them. Thank you for that. And it can be small things, it can be big things, but are we calling out good in each other? I know last week someone asked about connecting better with other children. What if one spouse connects better with another? And I remember asking a mom this who was farther along in the journey than I am, and I was kind of bemoaning, I don't connect well with this child. Jonathan does, but I don't. She's like, man, give thanks that someone does. Be thankful that one of you connects with that child. It's okay if it's not both of you. You can connect each other later and talk about it and figure out some ways to approach. But if they're connecting with someone, that's wonderful. And sometimes that changes over time and seasons. And there have been seasons when I've been closer to some kids than others, and then it kind of rotates out. And I think, again, it's okay. Kind of letting go of an idealized version of what it should be, and where are you, and where is God working here? And how is He filling in for the gaps where we don't, where we have so little to give? We have both been through difficult times where we have just not had much, and we've kind of had to fill in. And that God has been kind to fill in those gaps and to work His redemption in what we don't have. That kind of leads right into presence. How can we offer presence to each other? How can we offer that calm presence? I mean, I just wonder, what would it have looked like if I could have paused after going through all the different kids' crisis last Thursday night and say, okay, I'm tired, but what do you need right now? How can we get through this silly video audition without bad words at my scanner app? How can I offer some presence? And how can we make time for presence together? And this is really hard. Sometimes we find a rhythm, and then the kids have another lesson that gets thrown in, and the schedule changes again, and we don't have it. So what does it look like to make time for presence with each other? I know summer walks are really great for us because we can get out of earshot from our children. Winter is so hard. We have a hard time finding that space. So I'm actually super curious to hear some tabled conversation around that. I would love to know what some of you guys do to find that time in the midst of a season when my kids go to bed later than I do. And there's none of that window of time when there aren't other ears around. But how do we make that space? And I think our kids need to see that. They need to see that relationship being invested in. It's that the world is not completely around them, but that this is an anchor, and that we are important enough to each other to make that space and to be that presence in each other's life and to affirm that dignity in each other. And then making time to laugh together. You're talking through so many serious things all the time. Where are we going to find money for college? Where are we going to what are we going to do for this child? Oh, the car broke down again. But just making time to laugh and remember the joys of this season and the fun times. It can be a really fun season, even in the midst of all those rocky cliffs and all of those jagged edges. There's a lot of laughter to be found. And I think when we can be present in that laughter with each other, it's really, it feels very anchoring to me. And then curiosity, of course, making space for each other to ask some of these questions that we're asking our kids to each other. Hey, where's your heart today? Where are you? What do you need? There's questions that kids are always asking in terms of identity, purpose, and belonging. We're still asking those as middle-aged adults. We're still asking these questions. So making sure we're checking in. Hey, how are you? Where are you? Where's your identity right now? Are you feeling belonging and purpose? Not losing sight of who we are as people too. And then compassion. As I said, we have had at different times when one of us was just down and out. We have both been through seasons of long depression at different times. And there is a lot of space for bitterness when one spouse is checked out. And it's really, really hard to feel like you're a single parent a little bit. And we've both been on both sides of that. What does it look like to give compassion for where that person is and what they're not able to offer, whether it's just fatigue or stress or whatever? Is there a way to both call out good and also to be deeply compassionate for where they are and to trust God that He's not worried, He's not limited by our weakness, He's not anxious about our weakness. He is actually waiting to fill His goodness right in the very places we are most broken and weak. Can we have that compassion on each other in our own weaknesses? We're trying in this season to parent young adults who are full of angst and questions and life and enjoyment at the same time that we're also going through the middle-age years and dealing with all of the questions and some of the heartaches and struggles that come with that. As I was thinking through this aspect of compassion, I kept thinking of Matthew 14 when Jesus goes and is met. He's trying to get away to be by himself. And the reason he's getting away to be by himself is that his cousin, John the Baptist, was just brutally murdered. And I can only imagine the grief and the weighed down sense that Jesus must have had, that he wanted to go away and be in a place of desolation by himself, just him and the disciples. So as he's carrying this grief with him across the water, he lands on the other side, and he's met with a crowd of people. And what does it say his response is? He has compassion on them. He sees them, and he sees them with compassion, even out of his own, just his sense of emptiness, probably. I can imagine just that grief. I mean, this is the man who baptized him and who initiated his ministry. It was his cousin that he is grieving, and yet this crowd of people that needs him, he blesses, and he goes and he heals them, and he's walking among them. And then the disciples come up, and they're like, Jesus, they're hungry. They're like a house of teenagers. Teenagers are always hungry. And the crowd is hungry. And what does Jesus tell them? The disciples, he's like, well, what do you have? Like, just a little bit. A couple, some loaves and fish. He's like, that's great. Come bring it to me. I'm going to multiply it. And I'm going to use the very little that you have to feed this entire crowd of people. I think we are the disciples, questioning how we're going to have enough to feed these hungry teenagers, hungry in heart and soul and mind. And Jesus, knowing our own emptiness, knowing the grief of stepping in and giving when you are empty, has compassion on us. And he invites us into this process of feeding our children out of his abundance. And I think this is an amazing picture that to have for ourselves and for each other as we enter this space. Yes, we might be depleted. We've got nothing but a couple loaves of bread, but Jesus isn't worried. He's going to multiply it. And we don't know what that looks like. We may not see the fruit of that multiplication for a long time, but we will know the compassionate presence of Jesus looking at us with kindness in the midst of it. And then how do we cultivate safety, and not just in our immediate family, but also in our community? And I think this is huge. So often, support for parenting and kids kind of tends to drop off as they get older, but actually the needs get deeper and deeper. I think that the more the heavier the needs are, actually the more support we need. That might come from fewer places and more trusted places, and maybe like narrow but deep. And I think it's so, so vital that we have support for each other, and that we are sharing
in the community,
yeah. Sharing what's going on, and that there are people that we can be really honest with. It's hard because you don't want to go around telling what your young adult is struggling with. So again, I feel like it has to be a little narrower, but are we making space for each other to offer that kind of safety and dignity? Are their parents further on in their journey than you? And this is like gold. I have cried on the couches of some amazing older women in my life, and it has really ministered to me. And are there people you can seek out and just share and be someone who's been farther along in that journey? You can just say, yeah, it's okay, this is normal, it's gonna be okay, you're okay. And sometimes we just need to hear, like, you're doing a great job. Like, sometimes that's all it takes. Like, just hang in there, you're doing great. It's amazing what that can do. Now, this is also difficult because, again, you're spending your time on the road driving your children back and forth, or trying to figure out how to feed, the crowds of people in your house. So again, where are you? What are some creative ways you can invest? I feel like I'm a Voxer friend sometimes. Like, my friendships are kept through like a little app that's like a walkie-talkie on my phone, because I can do that while I'm driving. And it's amazing what you can do through a walkie-talkie app. So where are you? How do you have that vicinity with other people, and where can you make that connection? I would hope that these couple little sessions actually really help spur some other times of connecting around this. And I know that this space is welcome and available for groups getting together while the kids are in Wednesday nights, and just time for parents to hang out and share and pray and talk. So that's one really clear way, but there's lots of other ways as well to connect with those in your community. And then how do our kids need that support? And the older they get, the more adults I think they need speaking this dignity and compassion and presence in their life. I know how impactful that was for me as a teenager, and I think it's so impactful for our kids. And it can be a little hard to let go sometimes of being the one voice in their life. But I think the more voices that they have that are speaking truth and grace in their life, the more they are anchored in what God is doing in their story. So one thing I'd like to ask is, who else is praying for your kids? And I know it's super impactful when I have a friend of mine saying, hey, here's how I'm praying for your kid right now. Like, it blows me away every time. Nothing makes me feel more loved almost. Than someone loving my kid in that way. And there are ways that they are poured into here on Wednesday nights. There are other ways that I have adults who have come out to mentor some of my children one-on-one outside of Wednesday nights, can't say that. And then there's also just being in other homes that they love around other adults that they trust and that we trust, that are treating them with kindness and dignity. I think this is a way that we really offer them a bigger view of what kingdom living is. It's not just our nuclear family for the sake of nuclear family. We are actually here to go and to be a part of a bigger family. Our identity is actually bigger than this. And as they grow and learn to step into that, we have an opportunity to offer that to each other's children. And it's amazing what even just looking at someone in the eyes on Sunday morning and remembering something that they had told you 2 weeks ago can do. Like, it can be really small. It doesn't have to be this huge, like, oh, I'm going to mentor one-on-one. It can be just remembering they had a baseball game last week. How did that go? Remembering their name. That can be tricky when there's a lot of kids, but pick one. I don't know. So making it accessible. And also, I think when there are really intense needs that someone is going through, and we have had friends and family go through some really, really heavy things with their kids, are we a safe place for them to struggle? Are they going to feel sheltered, or are they going to feel shamed? I think it's really, really almost instinctive when a kid is really, really struggling to start questioning the parents. I think we all kind of do it instinctively. Like, I think it's kind of almost a reaction. What did the parents do wrong? Instead of, how can we love them? Like, how can we make them feel sheltered and safe? How can we cultivate safety for them so they don't feel shamed for what their child is struggling with or what their family is struggling with? And whatever that looks like, are we a safe place for failure? Are we a safe place for people to share what's really going on? I think I just have seen the impact both of having safe shelter from communities and not having it. I've seen that play out in different places and in different ways. And I hope that we can really be a safe place for each other to struggle well and to struggle safely, and whatever that looks like. And then, again, are there single parents in our life we can lean into? Single parents who don't have that spouse to bounce things off of at the end of the day? Who don't have that encouragement at the end of the day, like, man, I really saw what you did with your kid, this kid, that was so great. Or even just to question and struggle. Are there people we can be safer for in that way? And then ongoing conversations around safety in our culture. Our culture can feel like a really scary place, especially when it's all in your face, because it's like all right here. So everything that's going on is like here all the time. They don't really get a break from it. And so it's no wonder that we have one of the most anxious generations. But I think every generation is really kind of asking the same questions. It just manifests itself differently. I think every generation is asking, who am I? Do I belong? And what's my purpose? And our generation is, these kids' generation, Gen Z, is just kind of looking at that through, sexuality, technology. These are some of the ways that it's coming out now. But I think if we can reframe it for our kids from like, oh, these are scary, bad things, to, what do you think these people, or this group of people, are really longing for? When they're pursuing this, what do you think they're actually really wanting here? You think they're looking for belonging? You think maybe they're looking for purpose? Maybe they're looking for identity? And what do they need? Do they need our judgment, or do they need Jesus? And I think when we can frame that culture for that way for our kids, that also gives them a lens for their own struggles. What are they longing for? And if they're tempted towards this thing, what do they need? Do they need judgment? Or do they need Jesus? So how are we framing the culture to our kids? There's so many conversations to be had around all of these things, but I think how we come at it is really important in terms of how we relay the gospel to our kids. And do they see this as a big, scary place, or do they see this as people, humans, asking the same questions they're asking for themselves? How can they have compassion and dignity and presence and curiosity to a world that feels crazy and scary right now? Are there boundaries needed? Of course. How is that going to play out? That's going to be different from every family. I love hearing some of the discussions around this kind of thing. Are there very complicated, nuanced issues at stake? Yes. But how are we framing it? And how are we offering them safety in a world that feels kind of crazy? We're going to throw in one little appendix at the end of tonight's sharing. And we were asked on Sunday to share a little bit about how we create an open house for teenagers. I woke up to a bunch of extra cars at our house on Sunday morning, which is, we couldn't get out of the driveway. It's kind of like Tetris. But we love it. Like, we love having a house full of teenagers. That was something actually that we both felt really called to early on in our marriage, just to have kind of an open home. We had a lot of youth in and out early on. And so it's something we definitely wanted to do when our kids were older. So I had to kind of back up and think, well, how have we fostered that? I say one, it really is as simple as food. like when kids know that you'll feed them, when you feed them, they will come. I'm a very familiar face at Costco. They know when I get my hair cut. They know. We have a sandwich station set up on our counter all the time. Anyone that comes over knows that there's always peanut butter and jelly and honey. They can always make themselves a sandwich.
Bread, peanut butter, jelly, honey.
And Nutella. I always hear if we're out of Nutella.
Always there on the countertop.
So, do they know they're welcome? Do they know that we're excited to see them? That if they come over, yes, there is food for you. We have tried to say yes as much as possible. I will say this gets much easier the older they get. This is really hard in early teen years, and we've definitely had to have more boundaries. It's one thing to have, a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds over. It's another thing to have 13 and 14. It's a different dynamic. So, and the 17 and 18-year-olds can drive themselves. But especially as they've gotten older and are more mobile and independent, we have really just, try to say yes as much as we possibly could. And when they just bring them without asking, try to welcome that too. And then also, I will just try to say to whoever comes in, especially if they're new, hey, you're always welcome here. We are just always glad to have you anytime. But I will say too, there's a cost to this. This is not easy. Way to have your schedule thrown. You cannot go to bed whenever you want when there's a house full of teenagers. It will disrupt your world. It's very expensive too to feed, 20 teenagers. But memories of laughing, singing teenagers around my table are some of the richest experiences that I've had in my life, and I wouldn't trade it. I would also say, how can we also support other families that they feel safe to? It doesn't need to all be about our family. Are there other trusted homes that we love and respect, and they feel at home at that we can also encourage? Yeah, and my boys love the Shaddix basement. I feel like I should pay for renovations when they're gone. And they have family members that they go to often. And so it doesn't need to always, be about us. Are there other homes that we can really encourage them to enjoy and to love and to enjoy that community and foster that sense of welcome? So that is kind of all that we have for tonight. We are going to have some